Hello and welcome to Washington Exec's video series. I'm Rachel Kirkland, and today I am speaking with Bruce Caswell, CEO of Maximus, which provides business processing services to government clients in health and human services. Bruce, thank you so much for joining me.
Absolutely, Rachel. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yes. So our discussion today is around diversity and social justice. Bruce, in early June, you penned an open letter to your employees, sharing some of your thoughts around social justice and racial justice specifically. Tell us why these issues are important to Maximus as a company and why they're important to you on a personal level.
Sure. Beginning as a company, we have the privilege to serve tens of millions of Americans every day in the programs that we help our government partners administer, whether it's the Medicaid program, children's health insurance programs at the state level, the Medicare program, and in many instances, the federal marketplace or state-based marketplaces for otherwise known as Obamacare. And so in serving tens of millions of Americans, we serve people from all walks of life, all types of backgrounds. And it's so important that as a company, we represent the clients that we serve and the communities in which we work and serve. And so ensuring that our workforce feels that they work in an environment that respects diversity and is inclusive and provides equity and opportunity for individuals as they want to move up in the company or not, however that is so critical. So creating a positive and supportive and inclusive workplace for our employees where they feel like they can be their very best selves and they can provide absolutely essential services to some of the most needy Americans is a critical priority. I think that in many ways, diversity is a real strength of the company and one of its differentiators. So that's why it's so important for us as a company. And certainly at this time, with the events around George Floyd's murder and the calls for us to address as a society systemic racism and broader issues around social justice, there was no better time than to begin a dialogue with our employees. And I will say that from a very personal perspective, I thought long and hard about this, and that is I needed to resist kind of CEO's temptation to want to bring solutions. And rather to say, I really don't have the solutions. We need to begin by listening to our employees. And that's just what we did.
Absolutely. Now, you've said before that a starting point for making an impact can be to educate oneself. What has that process looked like for you?
You know, honestly, when I look back over my career, I will tell you that there's no doubt in my mind that the town hall meeting we did with our employees, where we had over 1,000 employees participate in a webinar. And it was great because it was facilitated by a great consultant that's done this with many companies. But the point of that was to create a listening session and a safe place for employees to express their concerns, express their desire to see change, not just in the company, but more importantly in the communities and in society more generally. It was an amazing moment. And just spending that hour and a half listening to employees and understanding their perspectives and the walk that they've been through, the journey, how issues related to social justice and systemic racism have affected them individually was incredibly powerful. And so while I've tried to also make sure that I'm reading important books about issues, for example, related to bias, and understanding from my own personal experience how I've benefited from some of the structures that have been put in place over the last 400 years in America, right? And having a realization and trying to develop the vocabulary to engage meaningfully with our employees and others in this area, that's all been part of the process, but nothing more powerful than just listening.
Wow. So, what are some of the measures that Maximus is putting into place to actively promote social justice both inside and outside the organization?
Well, the first is we're really accelerating programs and initiatives that we had in place long before 2020. And part of our plan has always been to bring more leadership to the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we accelerated that, and we're just thrilled that we recently just several days ago had Dr. Arvinita Washington Cherry join us as our new Senior Director for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. She is an anthropologist, a PhD in anthropology, who has specialized and taught courses in areas related to race and social justice, and she'll be leading our initiatives here at Maximus. And so that's a first important step. But I've been thinking about how we can have an impact and how we should prioritize our efforts. And if you'll indulge me for a moment, we see the potential at three levels. The first is as a company, kind of within the boundaries of what we control as a corporation. Secondly, in the communities that we serve. And then thirdly, in society more generally. And so our next step, now that we've had our town hall, we have a DE&I leader, is to begin a series of focus groups that we think will include between 300 and 400 individuals where they can bring their ideas and help us shape our priorities, where we believe we can begin by having the greatest impact just within the company. I'd be happy to give some examples, but that's kind of the framework and the approach that we're taking.
No, that makes a lot of sense, and thank you for sharing that. Do you have any closing thoughts before we go?
I guess my closing thought is that our work is never going to be fully complete. I think that we need to bring a great deal of humility to the realization that we are trying to affect change in areas that have really, unfortunately reflected centuries of structures that have been created and impacts on some of the most fragile members of society. So if we, in the time that we have, can focus our energies in places where we feel like we can move the needle a bit, we can be a better company, we can make sure that we're that diverse and inclusive workplace that we want to be, we can have a meaningful impact on the community, and maybe through some of our programs, improve the opportunities for individuals in those communities through employment with Maximus. I think we'll do a bit to move the needle in the right direction, right? But I think that the job will never be finished, and that's kind of a good way to think about it because it's so enormous and something that we need to kind of pass on to the next level of leadership down the road. So,
And Bruce, thank you so much for joining us today. It's an important conversation. Thank you again, and take care.
absolutely. Thank you, Rachel. Appreciate the time.